The relationship between the Theosophical Society and the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor involves an international cast of characters and intrigues on 4 continents in the 1880s. The writings of HBofL authors have been largely forgotten, but 3 forthcoming Typhon Press publications will deal with various aspects of that relationship. During research for those projects, I have gained a new appreciation for the early Theosophical Society. It is an honor to share some of my research in a conference sponsored by the TS in the Eastern Mediterranean, a region where its spiritual roots are deep and still poorly understood. The names Brotherhood of Luxor and Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor define 2 stages in the transition from legend to reality. Kenneth Mackenzie opened the confusing sequence of events in his 1877 Royal Masonic Cyclopedia by including 2 entries, both of which are mythical rather than historical. The first is for the Hermetic Brothers of Egypt, defined as an occult fraternity which has endured from very ancient times, having a hierarchy of officers, secret signs, and passwords. There is no evidence that any such group existed outside the pages of Mackenzie's cyclopedia. Mackenzie's entry for Brotherhood of Luxor described an American group with a Rosicrucian basis and many members. This veiled, inflated reference to the early Theosophical Society led to further hints from Alcott and Blavatsky. HPB confirmed the existence of the Brotherhood of Luxor, claiming it had been long and hard at work, yet was neither Rosicrucian nor based in Egypt, but rather in Luxor, Baluchistan, after which Luxor, Egypt was named. Alcott, on the other hand, testifies that she called the Brotherhood of Luxor the Egyptian group of the Universal Mystic Brotherhood. 2 early members of the Theosophical Society had not only met in Egypt, but had known HPB there. The memoir, written by Albert Rawson upon the death of Richard Francis Burton, describes the circumstances in which they met in 1853 in Cairo. The then pretty young grass widow Blavatsky, fresh from Russia, visited the same serpent charmers with us, but with a very different result. She went into ecstasy over the entire performance, dance, snakes, music, and the noises of the attendant rabble that surrounded the actors. "What do you think of the fair Cossack?" I asked Burton. "A dangerous young woman, trebly so from having a husband so near the frozen Caucasus, while she exposes herself to the ardent sun of Egypt." And of her mesmerism? Biology is a new study, not a science, as it is erroneously called, but yet in the experimental stage. Madame is reported to have done many wonder works. If we could see some, even one. Burton and Rawson were both enthusiasts of Sufism and Freemasonry as well as Theosophy. Burton produced many translations and commentaries, for example, the Arabian Nights, whereas Rawson's most notable creation was the Rituals of the Shriners, the ancient and Arabic order of the nobles of the mystic shrine. Neither continued as a supporter of the TS. Burton resigned his membership, and Rawson dropped his, and wrote mockingly, if affectionately, of HPB after her death. The Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, HBofL, which combined 2 of the names of Mackenzie's imaginary groups, was a real entity founded in England in 1884. Its founders claimed that they were continuing a work begun in Egypt in 1870. The spiritual guide of the Brotherhood was Max Theon, later claimed by others to have spent time in Egypt working in some manner with Blavatsky, but there is no supporting evidence. Actual operations of the order were directed by Peter Davidson, who continued to honor Theon as the master throughout his life. In 1885, Theon married an English medium, Mary Christine Ware, with whom he moved to Paris later that year. In 1887, the Theons moved to Tlemcen, Algeria, where they taught the Philosophie Cosmique to an international group of students. After Alma died in 1908, Theon reportedly ordered Bell and Henry Wagner, leaders of the Brotherhood in Denver, to close it down. Davidson's death in 1916 marked the last gasp of the HBofL in the United States. The Light of Egypt, the primary doctrinal book of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, is as mysterious in its use of pseudonyms as any book produced by Theosophists, Rosicrucians, or Spiritualists. The Light of Egypt was published in 1889 under the pseudonym Zanoni. With publication of a second volume in 1900, it was revealed that Zanoni had been the pen name of Thomas H. Burgoyne, secretary of the HBofL, who had allegedly died in 1894. Burgoyne himself is just as elusive as the book attributed to him. Several outsiders, often writing under pseudonyms themselves, made guesses about the HBofL leadership, and Max Theon, Grand Master of the Exterior Circle, inspired the greatest confusion. Although the name was actually a pseudonym of Louis Bimstein, son of a Warsaw rabbi, Theon was confused with two other individuals of different ethnic and religious backgrounds. The name T.H. Burgoyne was itself a pseudonym adopted around the time the HBofL was founded in 1884. Within a short time it was revealed that his real name was Thomas Henry Dalton, and that he had served 6 months in prison in England in 1883 for advertising fraud. This news was spread broadcast by Theosophists who saw it as a way to discredit a rival organization. The exposure destroyed the HBofL in England, but not in France, where it continued to thrive under Max Theon, nor in America, where Dalton arrived as Burgoyne with Peter Davidson and family in 1886. Although he arrived in the U.S. as Burgoyne, the pseudonym had been damaged by the Theosophists, and Dalton appears to have abandoned it at some point in California. Burgoyne used the name as an author for several years, but there are no solid records of his living under that name in the U.S. after 1886. His life in America is largely unknown territory for researchers. The membership records of Adyar show that a majority of leaders in the HBofL were current or former TS members. Although Theon and Burgoyne do not appear as Fellows of the Theosophical Society, or FTS, we see Peter Davidson, Otho Alexander, Hurricane Chintaman, Thomas Johnson, Charles Barlet, Genevieve Stebbins, and Bell Wagner, all in Adyar's records. The name Zanoni had first appeared as a pseudonym for Dalton in 1885. Zanoni was an 1842 Rosicrucian-themed novel by Edward Bulwer Lytton, in which the adept teacher of the title character was named Mejnour. Peter Davidson, Provincial Grand Master of the North of the original HBofL, wrote under the latter pen name. Zanoni's identity was so well concealed that Emma Harding Britton was twice accused by Theosophists of authoring The Light of Egypt. In response, Emma praised Burgoyne in the strongest terms and later wrote a glowing review of his book. The HBofL promised practical occult instruction to a frustrated Theosophical membership, impatient with the elusiveness and secrecy of the Mahatmas. The origins of the Theosophical Society in New York had involved just such practical occultism. In April 1877, the TS issued a defiant proclamation which admits that the society was then engaged in magical experimentation. This seems to have involved elementals, astral projection, and mesmerism. That magical phenomena do sometimes happen in presence of members of the society, and, when strangers can witness them, may be inferred from the editorial description which appeared in the New York World of Monday last. The Theosophical Society is quietly prosecuting those studies which interest the members, careful to neither infringe upon any person's rights, nor to transcend its own legitimate field. Greek Theosophists will find Otho Alexander to be of special interest and importance. Early correspondence of the Ionian TS, the first branch in Europe, shows its members had particular interest in mesmerism and practical occultism. Peter Davidson wrote to Charles Barlet, "The Theosophical Society is not and has not been since the arrival in India of Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, under the direction and inspiration of the authentic and real fraternity of the Himalayas, but under that of a very inferior order belonging to the Buddhist religion. If you have any doubts about what I say, Mr. Alexander of Corfu has several letters of Madame Blavatsky, in one of which she clearly confesses what I tell you." After several years, Alexander reverted to loyalty to the TS, as indicated by this announcement by William Q. Judge in The Path. Mr. Otho Alexander of Corfu, Greece, an old theosophist, has determined to dedicate to theosophy a cherished possession if a purchaser can be found. It is a collection of 290 autographed letters of the most eminent political, financial, and military leaders during the struggle for Greek independence between 1823 and 1827. Sarah Stanley Grimke was credited with sole or partial authorship of The Light of Egypt by 3 different sources. Elbert Benjamin, who credits her as Burgoyne's co-author rather than ghostwriter, wrote that she assisted T.H. Burgoyne in writing that part of Light of Egypt Volume 1, which deals with the science of the stars, and in many other ways gave valuable cooperation. After her death in 1898, Sarah's father, Moses Stanley, wrote to her husband, Archibald Grimke, that Dr. Wagner is a physician, publisher, and literary man. He published her book on Oriental philosophy, a book of some 400 pages, which has been through 6 editions, and some pamphlets. The Light of Egypt is the only book published by Wagner which meets this description. At the same time, Sarah's disciple, Emma Austin Tolis, wrote a letter to her daughter, Angelina Weld Grimke, in which she enthused, "One of the most wonderful souls that ever came to this planet. Her book, The Light of Egypt, is the most wonderful book of modern times, though she says it will be 100 years before the world will recognize it. She nearly lost her life in writing it, but her soul never flinched from a duty." Whatever the nature of her collaboration with Burgoyne, her stay in California was not long, as in 1888 she went to New Zealand at the invitation of a publisher and remained there until a heart attack required her return to the U.S., where she stayed with her parents in Michigan for 18 months before settling finally in San Diego, where she died in 1898. The contribution of Sarah Grimke to the lessons published under Burgoyne's name is only one of several mysteries associated with the book. Another twist in the Light of Egypt story is that Church of Light tradition features one individual among Burgoyne's alleged associates whose identity is quite confusing. Norman Astley, husband of Genevieve Stebbins, has been described as a pupil of Theon and colleague of Burgoyne in Church of Light tradition. But my tentative conclusion is that Thomas Dalton gave up the name Burgoyne and adopted that of Norman Astley upon his marriage to Genevieve Stebbins in late 1893. No record of the early 1894 supposed death of Thomas Henry Burgoyne or Dalton has been found in California, nor of his return to England under either of those names. With his marriage to Stebbins, Astley became her business manager at the successful New York School of Expression, and they traveled throughout the eastern U.S. giving classes and performances. Why might Burgoyne become Astley? Most likely as the Burgoyne resigned his HBofL role to take a new position as Stebbins' manager. Also possible that he was forced out by the Wagners or asked to step down by Theon. Becoming Mrs. Burgoyne would not be a good career move for Stebbins, a public figure. Denver was the center of the HBofL activities in America, which made Belle Wagner a more practical successor as secretary. Sarah Grimke had helped produce the Light of Egypt, after which Burgoyne was perhaps not as valuable to his colleagues, or as interested in continuing in his role with the Brotherhood. Any of these factors could have led to Burgoyne's vanishing into a new identity and marriage. Bell Wagner wrote of Burgoyne in 1900, "He shrank from public notoriety and modestly refused to be publicly known to the world. He moved in the world, comparatively unknown to the world at large, and his greatest friends, though mystified, did not understand his true worth in spiritual greatness." Genevieve Stebbins, unlike her husband, is well documented in genealogical records. Born in San Francisco in 1857, she became an actress in New York in her 20s. In the mid-1880s, she studied in England and France and first encountered the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. By the end of the decade, she became the most prominent American teacher of the Delsarte method of elocution and acting. She combined Delsarte methods with yogic breathing learned from a Swami at Oxford, as well as exercises involving stretches and postures adapted from yoga. After her retirement in 1907, Stebbins traveled with Astley, settling in England for several years, before returning to the U.S. in 1917. In 1918, the American remnants of the HBofL reorganized as the Brotherhood of Light, which in 1932 changed its name to the Church of Light. Hence, the story of the HBofL in America begins and ends with two other organizations. Its origins are intertwined with those of the Theosophical Society, while its demise coincided with the creation of the Brotherhood of Light, and subsequently the Church of Light. Stebbins is increasingly recognized by scholarly studies as a pioneer in dance, exercise, and yoga. Mark Singleton wrote in Yoga Body that the gentler stretching, deep breathing, and spiritual relaxation, colloquially known in the West today as hatha yoga, are best exemplified by variants of the harmonial gymnastics developed by Stebbins. In her final work, published in 1913, Stebbins wrote of her goal, "Recognizing the interdependence of mind and body and the great power of habit, let us learn this beautiful philosophy, training the body easily to express a beautiful soul, training the body to right normal expression, that through reflex action a sickly soul may grow into uprightness." Mirra Alfassa Richard became a student of Max Theon in the early 20th century, and her influence on the work of Sri Aurobindo makes her a figure of global significance. Despite being a Western-based Hermetic movement protesting the direction taken by the TS in India, the HBofL was not antagonistic to Hindu culture in general. Its two most influential converts both figure in the history of 20th century yoga. Mirra Alfassa, who had studied in Algeria before becoming a pupil of Sri Aurobindo, created with him an East-West synthesis under the label Integral Yoga. Stebbins gave her synthesis the name Harmonic Gymnastics and had the greatest influence of any HBofL figure on Benjamin's Brotherhood of Light lessons. Aurobindo's biographer writes of Mirra, "During their 3-month stay, Mirra underwent a profound inner development, but this was due more to Theon's wife than to Theon himself. Madame Theon was a marvelous woman from the point of view of experience, although her intellect was rather ordinary. Theon, on the other hand, had comparatively little experience, but an encyclopedic knowledge of things occult. A few lines from him was enough to inspire his wife to write pages and pages of what today might be called channeled writings." This emphasis on Madame Theon's authority from a female student highlights a theme in HBofL history that derives from its roots in the TS. Spiritual authority is attributed to mysterious male hierarchies, but the visible mouthpieces of the brotherhoods, major writers of the movement, are largely female. In the 1870s and 80s, Britten and Blavatsky engaged in a power struggle in which both appealed to masculine adept authorities writing as special initiates sworn to secrecy, using pseudonyms to refer to their mentors. By the 1890s, the writings of Grimke and Stebbins make no appeals to male authority and reject the mystique of secrecy and hierarchy. Perhaps the most important reason the HBofL became extinct was that the model of a secret society with mysterious adept authorities was simply no longer workable after the demise of Alma Theon, and especially that of Peter Davidson. Max Theon seems to have lost all interest in such activities after 1908. What then does the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor mean to us today? An extinct occult order, claimed as a precursor by some, dismissed as a fraud by others, largely ignored by scholars. To the Church of Light, the mysterious predecessor organization that became extinct, leaving many unanswered questions. To Theosophists, a group emerging from the 1884 crisis in the early TS, involving some important early members. To historians, a group which was too diverse geographically and ideologically to survive intact. To librarians and archivists, a body of literature almost forgotten and well worth preserving and rediscovering. And for me personally, as a researcher, it is intriguing because of the mysteries associated with pseudonyms in the source literature, and the work of Sarah Stanley Grimke in particular. Emma Harding Britton's Ghostland was considered authoritative by the HBofL leaders, and the forthcoming edition will shed new light on Chevalier Louis Deby and his adventures. Hurry Chinchintaman is the central character in my chapter for the collection Con Artists, Enthusiasts, and True Believers. This presentation has drawn on research for both those projects, but mainly from work on a scholarly edition of Sarah Stanley Grimke's Esoteric Lessons. I thank the conference organizers for including this long-neglected subject in the program, and welcome communication from fellow researchers interested in the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and its origins in the Theosophical Society.